The applause started before I could speak. My mother proudly announced that I was giving my sister $25,000 to save her business, and everyone cheered as if the decision were already mine. Why was my name on the document she was holding? Why wouldn't my father look at me? I recognized the email on the page, but someone had changed it. I waited until every hand stopped clapping before I smiled and said, "Please don't put those papers away. Let's read them together. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me your country and your local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining us from. And if you've ever been pressured to sacrifice for family simply because you were the responsible one, I'd like to hear your story too." If you enjoy realistic stories about family truth and healthy boundaries, I'd be honored if you subscribed and stayed with me for the rest of this journey. 3 months before my mother's birthday party, if someone had asked me whether my family respected my boundaries, I probably would have answered yes. Not because they actually did, because I had become very good at confusing temporary peace with genuine respect. My name is Rose Hoffman, and I work as a senior financial compliance manager for a healthcare company in downtown Chicago. My job revolves around documentation, internal controls audits, and making sure every financial decision can be supported by evidence. I spend my days asking uncomfortable questions, verifying records, and reminding executives that good intentions don't replace proper authorization. Ironically, none of those skills had prepared me for my own family. Growing up, my parents always described me as the responsible one. It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. Being responsible meant I never asked for expensive gifts. Being responsible meant I found scholarships for college. Being responsible meant I accepted my first apartment with mismatched furniture because I couldn't justify buying new pieces. And after I built a stable career, being responsible somehow became another word for available. Whenever something went wrong, everyone looked in my direction. A few years earlier, my father, Richard, needed surgery that insurance didn't fully cover. I paid the remaining balance without hesitation. He thanked me over the phone with tears in his voice, promising he would never forget what I'd done. I never expected him to repay me. He was my father. A year later, my younger sister Emily called because her event planning business had lost several corporate clients after a recession slowed spending. She was behind on rent for her small office. "I just need a little help getting through this month," she told me. I transferred the money. 6 months after that, my mother Linda explained that unexpected repairs had damaged the roof over their garage. "I hate asking," she said. I believed her. I paid for the repairs. None of those decisions bothered me individually. What bothered me was what happened afterward. No one remembered the help. They remembered the pattern. By the beginning of that spring, Emily's business was struggling again. Weddings had been postponed, 2 major contracts disappeared, and several invoices remained unpaid. One Sunday afternoon, my mother called while I was grocery shopping. "Emily's under a lot of pressure," she began. "I know." I think she's embarrassed to ask. "I understand." There was a brief silence. "You've always done well financially." There it was. I pushed my shopping cart toward the produce section before answering. "I'm doing well because I have a budget, Mom." "So does Emily." "Does she?" Another pause. "You know what I mean." "I do." She sighed. "Couldn't you loan her something?" "I've already helped several times." "Families help each other." "They do." I agreed. That's why I'm willing to sit down with her, review the business, build a cash flow plan, and help negotiate with creditors if necessary. "I wasn't talking about spreadsheets." "I know." She sounded disappointed. Emily called the following evening. "I don't need a lecture." "I'm not offering one. I just need breathing room." "I'll gladly spend an entire weekend helping you reorganize the business." "I need money, Rose." And I think what you actually need is a business that doesn't depend on emergency transfers every year." She became quiet. "I knew you'd say no." "I didn't say no to helping." "You know what I mean." Apparently everyone did. A week later, Emily came to my apartment carrying coffee and pastries. For a moment, I thought she had accepted my offer. Instead, she spread invoices across my dining table. "I owe about $38,000. I looked carefully at every document. Some expenses were unavoidable, others weren't. Designer office furniture, premium marketing subscriptions, luxury networking retreats. None of them had created more revenue. We spent almost 3 hours reviewing everything. By the end, I had built a repayment schedule, identified expenses she could eliminate immediately, and recommended meeting with a small business advisor. She looked exhausted. "You really think this could work?" "I do." "But you're still not giving me money." "No." She folded the papers without arguing. "I guess Mom was right." I looked up. "About what?" "That once people have enough money, they forget how hard it is for everyone else." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Not because they were true, because someone had convinced her they were. The following Friday, I met with my attorney, Rebecca Lawson, to update several estate planning documents after purchasing an investment property. Before we finished, I casually mentioned the ongoing family conversations. Rebecca smiled sympathetically. "I've seen this more often than you'd think." "What?" "Successful relatives becoming everyone's emergency plan." "I don't mind helping." "I know," she said, "but there's a difference between generosity and obligation." She leaned forward. "Here's one piece of advice. Keep every email, every text message, every financial conversation you can document." I laughed. "You think it's going to become legal?" "I hope not." "Then why?" "Because families often remember conversations differently once money gets involved." That sentence seemed overly cautious at the time. I thanked her anyway. Over the next several weeks, my mother stopped asking for money altogether. The silence felt unusual, almost suspicious. Instead, she began talking about happier things. Emily seemed more cheerful during family calls. My father sounded relaxed. No one mentioned loans. No one mentioned debt. No one mentioned business problems. For the first time in months, I believed everyone had accepted my answer. Then, 2 weeks before my mother's birthday, an invitation arrived in my mailbox. Heavy cream-colored cardstock. Gold lettering. Elegant enough to look like a wedding invitation. Across the front were 7 simple words. "Join us as we celebrate new beginnings." I smiled. I had no idea those 3 words weren't describing my mother's birthday. They were describing the story she intended everyone else to believe. When I walked back into the banquet room after greeting a few cousins in the hallway, lunch had just been served. The atmosphere felt unusually warm. Too warm. My mother, Linda, wasn't sitting at her table anymore. She stood near the small stage where the country club usually hosted wedding toasts. A wireless microphone rested in her hand, and beside her was a gift bag tied with a silver ribbon. "I just want everyone's attention for a moment," she said. Conversations faded. Forks stopped moving. Even the waitstaff paused. "I've always believed birthdays aren't about receiving," my mother began. "They're about celebrating the people who make our lives better." Several relatives nodded. She smiled toward me. "And today, I want to celebrate both of my daughters." I smiled politely. Nothing about those words seemed unusual. Then she reached into the gift bag and removed a stack of neatly printed papers. "My oldest daughter, Rose, asked me not to make a big deal out of this." My stomach tightened. "But I don't think generosity should stay hidden." She held up the first page. "Rose has decided to give Emily $25,000 so she can rebuild her business." The room exploded. People clapped. Someone whistled. One of my cousins stood and shouted, "That's incredible!" My aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Emily froze for a second before covering her mouth. "Oh my God!" She looked completely overwhelmed. Then she hurried toward my mother and wrapped her in a hug. "I can't believe she did this." Neither could I, because I hadn't. A champagne glass was raised from another table. "To Rose." Everyone echoed the toast. "To Rose." For a strange moment, I wasn't the center of attention. I was the subject of a story everyone else had already accepted as true. Several relatives began speaking over one another. "I always knew she'd help. That's what family does." "Emily finally gets a fresh start." Someone patted my shoulder as if congratulating me for a decision I had never made. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Years of compliance work had trained me to resist reacting before understanding. Emotion makes people speak. Evidence makes them listen. Emily finally reached me. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her shaking. "I don't know how to thank you." I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily..." Before I could finish, another relative interrupted. "You've got the best sister in the world." Emily nodded through tears. "I know." She honestly believed every word. That realization hurt more than the applause. If she had been part of some elaborate scheme, I expected nervousness. Instead, she looked relieved, hopeful, grateful. Whatever had happened, she appeared to believe our mother completely. I shifted my attention back to Linda. She wasn't looking at Emily. She was watching me, waiting, testing, as though she expected one of two outcomes. Either I would smile and accept the lie, or I would publicly refuse, destroying both Emily's joy and my mother's birthday celebration. It was a carefully designed trap. One path made me financially responsible. The other made me emotionally responsible. I chose neither. Instead, I looked toward my Uncle David. He had stopped smiling. The packet being passed around his table held his attention. He slowly adjusted his reading glasses and examined the first page instead of celebrating with everyone else. That was interesting. David had spent nearly 4 decades reviewing financial records. Tiny inconsistencies caught his attention almost automatically. He turned the paper slightly, read another paragraph, then frowned, only for a second. But I saw it. Across the room, my father avoided my eyes entirely. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. He looked like someone waiting for bad weather to arrive. Did he know? Or had he simply realized too late what my mother intended? I couldn't tell. Meanwhile, copies of the document continued moving from table to table. Every person who accepted one became another witness, not to the truth, to the version of events my mother wanted preserved. I watched one cousin point excitedly to a paragraph halfway down the page. Another whispered. Rose even explained why she wanted to keep it private. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. The more people read those papers, the more opportunities there would be for someone else to notice what I already had. A document doesn't become authentic because 50 people read it. It becomes vulnerable because 50 people may notice 50 different things. My mother finally raised the microphone again. I think we should all recognize Rose for reminding us what family really means. Another round of applause began. This time I didn't watch the crowd. I watched the documents. Some were folded. Some lay open. One rested directly in front of Uncle David. He wasn't clapping anymore. He was comparing the first and second pages. Slowly, carefully. Exactly the way he always reviewed tax filings. Then he looked up. Our eyes met across the room. He didn't smile. He gave me the smallest nod. Not agreement, not certainty, recognition. He had found something too. The applause gradually faded until the room became quiet again. My mother turned toward me with complete confidence. "Rose," she said warmly, "would you like to tell everyone why you wanted to do something so generous for your little sister?" Dozens of faces turned toward me. Emily's eyes were full of gratitude. My father finally looked up. David quietly placed his reading glasses on the table. I stood, smiled. And instead of answering my mother's question, I said, calmly, "Before anyone puts those papers away, would you mind keeping them exactly where they are?" Confused expressions spread across the room. I continued, "I think everyone deserves to read every page very carefully." Silence settled over the banquet room. For the first time that afternoon, no one applauded, no one moved. The banquet room, so loud only seconds earlier, had become almost painfully quiet. My mother let out a small laugh, the kind people use when they think someone is making an awkward joke. "Oh, Rose," she said, "you don't have to be embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed," I smiled politely. "I'd just like everyone to read exactly what they're congratulating me for." A few relatives exchanged uncertain glances. Someone near the back chuckled nervously. My mother kept hold of the microphone. "The email speaks for itself." "I agree," I replied. "Emails usually do." That answer landed differently than she expected. She hesitated, only for a heartbeat. But I noticed. "So," I continued, "may I borrow one of the copies?" My cousin Hannah handed hers to me without saying a word. I thanked her, walked to the front of the room, and looked at the first page as though I were seeing it for the very first time. "I recognize parts of this," I said. Several relatives nodded. "Of course you do," my mother answered. "You wrote it." "I wrote parts of it." The room became still again. I held up the paper. "Has everyone here ever forwarded an email?" A few people raised their hands instinctively. "When you forward one, the original header stays attached unless you intentionally remove it." No one interrupted. "This document doesn't have a header." I turned the page around so everyone could see. No sender. No recipient. No date. No time. No subject line. I looked at my mother. "That's unusual, isn't it?" She folded her arms. "I only printed the important part." "The important part?" I repeated calmly. My Uncle David finally stood. "If you don't mind," he said, "I'd like to see that copy." I handed it to him. He adjusted his glasses and spent nearly a minute reading every line. No one spoke. The silence itself became uncomfortable. Finally, he looked up. "Rose is correct." A ripple passed through the room. "The formatting is inconsistent." My mother frowned. "What does that mean?" David pointed to the second paragraph. "This sentence begins with one font." His finger moved farther down. "It ends with another." Several relatives leaned closer. "It could simply be a printing issue," my mother insisted. "It could," David agreed. "But I'd want to verify that before treating it as evidence of any agreement." My mother laughed again. "David, this isn't an audit." "No," he answered gently. "But it is a statement that someone is expected to transfer $25,000. That sentence changed everything. For the first time, people stopped looking at me. They started looking at the paper. Emily stepped closer. "Mom." Linda forced another smile. "Sweetheart, don't overthink this." "I'm not." Emily reached for one of the copies herself. She read more carefully this time. I don't remember seeing this before." My mother's smile faded ever so slightly. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Emily nodded uncertainly. "But if Rose wrote this..." She looked toward me. Why does she seem confused? I answered before my mother could. Because this isn't the email I sent. The room filled with murmurs. One aunt whispered something to her husband. Another cousin quietly pulled out his phone and enlarged the photograph he had taken during the toast. My mother noticed. "Everyone, please," she said. "Let's not turn this into an interrogation." "I'm not interrogating anyone," I replied. "I'm asking for the same thing I ask every day at work." "And what's that?" she asked. "The original document." She blinked. "This is the original." "No." I shook my head once. "This is a printout." "They're the same thing." "They're absolutely not." I kept my voice calm. "A printout shows words. An original email shows where those words came from." I could see several people beginning to understand, including the sender. The date, the exact time, the full conversation, and whether anything was added, removed, or rearranged. David nodded slowly. "That's correct." My mother glanced around the room. She had expected applause. Instead, she found skeptical faces. Richard finally spoke for the first time all afternoon. "Linda." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should slow down." She turned toward him. "You're taking her side." "I'm asking everyone to make sure we're looking at the whole picture." Emily stared at our father. "You've seen this email before." He froze. The question had come too quickly. He swallowed. "I saw something." "What does that mean?" Emily asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Your mother showed me a draft." "Draft." The word echoed through the room. I noticed David close his eyes for a brief second. Then he looked directly at my father. "Richard?" "Yes." "When you say draft, do you mean this wasn't printed directly from Rose's inbox?" Richard's shoulders sank. "I honestly don't know." Linda immediately stepped in. "Richard doesn't understand computers." "No," David said quietly, "but he understands the word draft." Nobody spoke. The silence had become impossible to ignore. I reached into my handbag. "I wasn't planning to do this today." Several heads turned toward me, but after hearing the word draft, I removed my tablet. "I think it's time everyone sees the email exactly as I sent it." My mother took one involuntary step forward. "Rose." I looked at her, still calm, still smiling. "Don't worry." I unlocked the screen. "I brought the original conversation." I placed my tablet on the table in front of me, but didn't unlock it right away. People often imagine that exposing a lie is dramatic. In reality, it usually begins with something much quieter. Verification. "I'm going to show everyone the email exactly as it exists in my inbox," I said. "Not a screenshot, not a printout, the original message with the complete conversation." No one spoke. Even the servers who had been clearing empty plates stopped moving. My mother folded her arms. "Rose, this has gone far enough." I looked at her. "It hasn't even started." I unlocked the screen. My email application opened to a folder labeled Family. "I organize almost everything," I explained, "mostly because my work requires it." I tapped the search bar and typed Emily's name. Dozens of messages appeared. Birthdays, holiday plans, restaurant reservations, business advice, budget spreadsheets. Then I opened one dated nearly 6 weeks earlier. "This," I said, turning the tablet so the people closest to me could see, "is the conversation these pages were created from." David stepped beside me. "May I?" "Of course." He adjusted his glasses again. For nearly a minute he read silently. Then he began scrolling upward and upward. The room watched him instead of me. Finally he nodded. "This is a complete email chain." My mother immediately interrupted. Anyone can edit something on a tablet. I expected that concern, I replied, so I brought more than one copy. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. Inside were printed versions of the original email conversation. Each page included the sender-recipient date subject line and timestamp. I handed one to David, another to my father, another to Aunt Carol. I printed these yesterday after speaking with my attorney. That sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. My attorney, one cousin repeated. Yes. Why would you involve an attorney? Because I received several messages this week thanking me for a donation I never agreed to make. A murmur spread through the room. Emily looked genuinely confused. You got messages? I nodded. 4. I opened another document. The first arrived on Tuesday. I read aloud. Rose, your generosity means so much to Emily. Your mother told us your gift inspired everyone else to contribute another. We're adding $2,000 because of your incredible example. Another. Your family should be proud of you. I looked around the room. I hadn't promised anyone $25,000. Emily slowly turned toward our mother. You told everyone before today, Linda answered without hesitation. I knew your sister would do the right thing. Mom, I've known Rose her entire life. She looked directly at me. She's generous. I try to be. So why is this different? Because generosity requires a choice. She frowned. You were always going to help. No. I answered so calmly that several relatives looked surprised. I was always willing to help Emily. I was never willing to let someone else volunteer my money. David cleared his throat. I'd like everyone to notice something. He held up both versions of the email. The printed packet begins halfway through the conversation. He flipped to another page. The original begins 3 emails earlier. He continued reading. In the original exchange, Rose repeatedly offers to review Emily's financial statements. He looked over his glasses. Not once does she offer $25,000. Emily stepped beside him. Can I see? David handed her the pages. She compared them slowly, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. Then she stopped. Wait. Her finger rested on one sentence. This says, she looked up at me, I'd rather help build a recovery plan than create another emergency transfer. That's what I wrote. She looked back at the packet our mother had distributed. The sentence there read very differently. I'd rather help. The remaining words had disappeared. The next paragraph now began with, by transferring $25,000. Emily stared at both pages. They don't even match. No, I said quietly. They don't. My mother stepped forward. I shortened the email because no one wanted to read pages of financial advice. You shortened it, David asked. I summarized it. He looked at her carefully. Linda, yes, a summary cannot change someone's decision. She opened her mouth but said nothing. He continued, when you remove words that reverse the meaning of a sentence. He held up both documents side by side. You are no longer summarizing. The room remained silent. My father finally spoke. I didn't realize. His voice cracked. I honestly thought Rose had agreed. I believed him. He had seen enough to assume, not enough to verify. That was exactly how my mother had designed it. Emily slowly lowered the papers. Her eyes filled with tears again. Only this time, they weren't tears of gratitude. They were tears of embarrassment. She looked at me. I thought, you believed what you were told. I'm so sorry. I walked over and gently squeezed her hand. You weren't the one who altered anything. She nodded, unable to speak. Just then, my tablet vibrated. A new email notification appeared across the screen. The sender's name caught my attention immediately. Rebecca Lawson, my attorney. The subject line was only 5 words long. You need to see this. I opened the message. Attached was a PDF I had never seen before. The file name made my stomach tighten. Family Donation Commitment Die PDF. And according to the email, someone had already been circulating it with my name attached. I opened the attachment without saying a word. For a moment, all I could hear was the quiet hum of the banquet room's air conditioner. The PDF loaded. Across the top in bold letters was a title I had never seen before. Family Donation Commitment. Commitment underneath it appeared my full legal name. Rose Marie Hoffman. Someone in the room leaned closer. What is that? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. I enlarged the document and immediately recognized another familiar pattern. It wasn't just built from my emails. It had been designed to look like a formal agreement. There were bullet points, a payment schedule, even a section labeled Commitment to Family Support. I had never created anything remotely like it. David stepped beside me again. May I? I handed him the tablet. He read slowly, his expression growing more serious with every page. After nearly 2 minutes, he looked up. This wasn't prepared in a few minutes. No, it took planning. The room remained silent. Emily looked between us nervously. What does it say? David answered carefully. It says Rose voluntarily committed $25,000 toward your business. Emily swallowed. But she didn't. No. He scrolled farther down. And according to this document, several family members agreed to contribute smaller amounts because Rose was leading the effort. A murmur swept through the room. One of my cousins frowned. That's exactly what Aunt Linda told us. Another cousin nodded. She said Rose wanted everyone to help. My Aunt Carol slowly raised her hand. I transferred $1,500 on Thursday. Across the room, another voice spoke. We sent $2,000. So did we. We contributed $500. One by one, relatives admitted they had already donated. No one had questioned it. Why would they? They trusted my mother. They trusted me. Together, those 2 things had been enough. Emily covered her mouth. You mean, people already gave money because they thought I was getting Rose's $25,000 too? No one answered. They didn't have to. The answer was sitting in everyone's lap. Linda finally broke the silence. I was only trying to help. David looked directly at her. Help whom? My family. Which family member? Linda hesitated. Emily. He nodded once. And what about Rose? I knew she'd understand. I finally spoke. Mom, did you ever once ask whether I wanted my name attached to this? I knew what your answer would be. No. I shook my head gently. You knew what answer you wanted. Her shoulders stiffened. You've always been successful. I've been fortunate. You can afford it. Whether I can afford something isn't permission. Several people quietly nodded. I wasn't trying to embarrass my mother anymore. At this point, the facts were speaking for themselves. Emily slowly walked toward Linda. Mom. Linda reached for her hand. I did this for you. Emily stepped back. No. Her voice trembled. You did this without asking either of us. That sentence seemed to hit my mother harder than anything I had said. She looked around the room searching for support. Instead, she found uncertainty, questions, disappointment. David continued reviewing the PDF. Then he stopped. Rose. Yes. I think you should see page 4. I moved beside him. Near the bottom of the page was a list titled Confirmed Family Contributors. Each name had a dollar amount beside it. Some had check marks. Others were marked pending. Beside my name appeared Rose Hoffman, $25,000, confirmed. Not proposed, not requested, confirmed. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Someone hadn't simply hoped I would agree. Someone had already decided that my agreement wasn't necessary. David looked at the final page. His eyebrows rose. Interesting. What? This document has revision history. I blinked. Revision history. Yes. He enlarged the bottom margin. Most people would never have noticed it. Tiny gray print. Version 4.2 last edited April 18th. My mother's birthday was only May 30th. This plan had existed for more than a month. It was prepared weeks ago, David said quietly. So this wasn't a last-minute decision. No. Emily stared at our mother. You've been planning this since April. Linda didn't answer. Richard closed his eyes. I had no idea. Then another voice came from the back of the room. It was my cousin, Michael. Actually, everyone turned toward him. I remember Aunt Linda asking me not to mention the fundraiser because Rose wanted it to stay confidential until today. Several other cousins exchanged uncomfortable looks. I got the same message. So did we. I thought it was supposed to be a surprise. One by one, more pieces fell into place. Private phone calls, emails, text messages, individual conversations. The birthday party hadn't created the story. It had only revealed it. The real campaign had been happening quietly for weeks. Rebecca's words from my office echoed in my mind. Families often remember conversations differently once money gets involved. This wasn't a different memory. It was an organized narrative. I reached into my briefcase once more. There is one more thing. Every eye turned toward me. I wasn't going to bring it out unless I absolutely had to. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. Across the front in Rebecca Lawson's handwriting were 7 words. Open only if the documents are disputed. No one reached for the envelope. They simply stared at it. My mother looked at Rebecca's handwriting as though the words themselves had become the problem. You brought legal paperwork to my birthday? She asked quietly. No, I said. I brought it in case I needed to protect myself. From your own family. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. I slid the envelope across the table to Uncle David. Would you mind opening it? He looked at me for confirmation. When I nodded, he carefully broke the seal. Inside were several documents neatly clipped together. The first page was a letter on Rebecca Lawson's letterhead. David adjusted his glasses and began reading silently before looking up. This isn't a demand letter. My mother let out a breath she had clearly been holding. It isn't. No. He continued reading. It's simply a summary of the evidence Rose preserved before today's gathering. He handed the letter to me. You should explain. I faced the room. 3 weeks ago, people I hadn't spoken to in months started thanking me for a gift I never promised. I looked around at my relatives. That worried me. So I contacted Rebecca. She didn't tell me to threaten anyone. She told me to preserve evidence. I removed another document. This is a timeline. Several relatives leaned closer. Every phone call, every email, every text message, every meeting, every date was listed in chronological order. Next came copies of the original email chain, then screenshots of text messages, then printouts of the altered version my mother had distributed. Finally, there was a comparison showing exactly which sentences had been removed, rearranged, or inserted. I didn't have to explain much. The documents did it for me. David quietly said, "This is how financial investigations are usually presented." My cousin Michael flipped through the pages. I can actually follow this. That's the idea, I replied. I didn't want anyone to take my word for it. Emily sat down slowly. She had stopped crying. Now she looked exhausted. I feel sick. I pulled out the chair beside her. This isn't your fault. She shook her head. I should have called you. You believed Mom. I never imagined she'd... Her voice disappeared. My mother interrupted. I was trying to save your business. Emily looked up. You never asked me if I wanted everyone to think my own sister rescued me. Linda blinked. I thought you'd be grateful. I would have been grateful if Rose chose to help. Emily's eyes filled again. But I didn't want a gift built on a lie. The room fell silent. My father stood for the first time that afternoon. He looked older than he had when the party began. I owe everyone an apology. Linda turned toward him. Richard? No. He shook his head. I should have stopped this. You didn't even know. I knew enough. His words hung in the air. I saw the draft weeks ago. He looked at me. When I asked whether you'd agreed, Linda said you wanted it kept confidential. He lowered his eyes. I didn't verify it. I wasn't angry with him anymore. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. For most of my life, my father had avoided conflict because he believed silence kept the family together. Today proved the opposite. Silence had nearly broken it. David cleared his throat. I'd like to say something. Everyone turned toward him. I've worked as a CPA for 36 years. He rested both hands on the table. I've investigated missing funds, fraudulent invoices, forged signatures, and altered financial statements. He looked at the comparison packet. The documents themselves matter. Then he looked around the room. But what matters even more is what happened before the documents existed. People listened carefully. He continued. Someone decided another adult's consent wasn't necessary. His voice remained calm. That's the real issue. No one argued, because no one could. Linda slowly sat down. For the first time all afternoon, she looked less defensive than tired. I honestly believed Rose would eventually say yes. I answered gently. If you believed that... I paused. Why didn't you ask me one last time before telling everyone? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Emily whispered the answer before anyone else could. Because if Rose said no in private... She looked at our mother. Your plan would have ended. No one spoke. Linda's silence confirmed more than any confession could. She had counted on public pressure to accomplish what private conversations never had. After nearly a minute, she looked at me. What happens now? It wasn't a challenge. It was an honest question. I glanced at Rebecca's letter still resting on the table. That depends on what everyone wants. Several relatives looked confused. I continued. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to correct the truth. I turned toward Emily. I'm still willing to help you. She looked startled. You are? Yes, but not by writing a $25,000 check. She nodded slowly. What kind of help? Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Rebecca. Before anyone leaves, ask whether every family contribution has already been deposited. That answer changes everything. I looked up from the screen. Until that moment, I had assumed the money was simply sitting in someone's account. Rebecca clearly believed otherwise, and judging by the expression on my mother's face when I asked the question, she already knew the answer. I slipped my phone back into my purse. My mother's expression had changed so quickly that I almost missed it. Just a slight tightening around her eyes, a hesitation. It lasted less than a second, but after years of interviewing employees during compliance investigations, I'd learned that hesitation often arrived before the truth did. I looked around the room. Before anyone leaves, I said, I'd like to ask one question. No one interrupted. The money everyone contributed. I paused. Where is it? Silence. I turned toward my mother. Has it already been deposited into Emily's business account? Emily immediately looked at Linda. Mom. Linda clasped her hands together. I was holding it. Holding it where? David asked. In my savings account. Several relatives frowned. You deposited it, my cousin Hannah asked. It was only temporary, Linda replied quickly. I wanted to give everything to Emily after today's announcement. David's voice remained calm. So the contributions were deposited into your personal account. It was easier that way. No, David said gently. It was more convenient. That's different. Emily stared at our mother in disbelief. You never told me people had already sent money. I wanted today to be special. You wanted today to be irreversible, I said quietly. No one disagreed. Linda looked at me. I wasn't stealing anything. I didn't say you were. I always intended to transfer every dollar. I believe you. That answer surprised her. You believe me. I believe you intended the money for Emily. I held her gaze. But intention doesn't erase the decisions you made to get it. David nodded. Those are two separate issues. My father slowly sat beside my mother. Linda. She wouldn't look at him. I truly thought, she whispered, that once Rose saw everyone together, she'd understand. I took a slow breath. Understand what? That family comes before pride. This has never been about pride. What is it about then? Choice. The room became quiet again. When Dad needed surgery, I chose to help. When your roof leaked, I chose to help. When Emily struggled before, I chose to help. I wasn't raising my voice. If you remove the choice, it's no longer generosity. Emily lowered her eyes. I never thought about it that way. I know. She looked at me carefully. I honestly believed Mom had already talked to you. I figured that out. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I've spent the last hour thanking you for something you never offered. You thanked me because you trusted Mom. She nodded. And because I wanted to believe someone had solved my problems. For the first time all afternoon, we weren't speaking like sisters caught in a fight. We were speaking like two adults trying to understand how we'd both ended up in the same trap. Emily wiped her eyes. I owe everyone an apology. No, David said. You owe yourself a fresh start. She looked confused. He smiled kindly. A business survives because its owner learns to solve difficult problems. Not because someone else keeps rescuing it. Emily gave a small, embarrassed laugh. I suppose a CPA would say that. A CPA who's watched a lot of businesses recover. She smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was real. My mother quietly reached into her handbag. Without speaking, she removed an envelope. Inside were several cashier's checks. I hadn't deposited everything, she admitted. I kept the larger contributions separate. She placed the checks on the table. I was going to combine them after lunch. David counted them. The total matches the contribution list. Then he looked at the relatives. It appears everyone's money is still accounted for. A wave of relief passed through the room. No one had lost their savings. Not financially. Emotionally was another matter. My mother looked exhausted. I've spent my whole life believing the strongest person in the family should carry everyone else. She looked directly at me. My father carried us. Then your older brother did. She glanced toward David. When you became successful, her voice broke. I thought it was simply your turn. For the first time that afternoon, I wasn't hearing manipulation. I was hearing the belief underneath it. A belief that had probably existed long before I was born. I understand why you think that, I said softly, but I can't live that way. She nodded slowly. I know. No. I shook my head gently. I don't think you do. I pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. I will always love this family. I will help when I freely decide to. I will share my knowledge. I will show up. But I won't allow anyone, not even you, to promise my money, my time, or my decisions before asking me. She listened without interrupting. Those aren't walls. They're boundaries. And boundaries are the reason relationships survive. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I thought boundaries pushed people away. They push resentment away. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered the words I had been waiting to hear all day. I'm sorry, Rose. Not, I'm sorry you were upset. Not, I'm sorry you misunderstood. Just, I'm sorry. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I forgive you. She looked relieved. Then I added quietly, but forgiveness doesn't mean this can ever happen again. She nodded. I understand. I hope so. Emily looked between us. So, what happens to my business now? I smiled. I have one proposal. Everyone waited. It doesn't involve a $25,000 check. Everyone looked at me. For the first time that afternoon, no one was expecting me to rescue the situation with a wire transfer. They were simply waiting to hear what I actually wanted to do. I turned to Emily. Do you still have the business plan you showed me a few weeks ago? She nodded. It's in my laptop. Good. I smiled gently. Bring it to my office on Monday morning. She blinked. That's it. Not quite. I pulled a notepad from my purse and began writing. I'll introduce you to a small business consultant I've worked with before. He specializes in companies that are profitable on paper but constantly run out of cash. Emily listened carefully. I'll also connect you with a commercial banker who works with businesses instead of personal loans. She looked surprised. You'd do that? Of course. I looked around the room. I've never refused to help. I've refused to become the solution every time money runs out. No one argued, because finally everyone understood the difference. David smiled. That's a far more valuable gift than a check. I laughed softly. I hope so. Then I turned toward the stack of cashier's checks lying on the table. As for the money everyone contributed, I paused. I think it should go back. Several relatives immediately shook their heads. You don't have to do that. We wanted to help. I still want to help Emily. So do I, another cousin added. The room began filling with overlapping voices. Someone offered free legal advice for Emily's contracts. Another cousin owned a marketing agency and volunteered to review her advertising. An uncle who managed commercial property said he'd introduce Emily to a landlord with lower rent. Within minutes, the conversation had changed completely. No one was talking about my $25,000 anymore. They were talking about building something together. Emily quietly wiped another tear from her cheek. I've spent months thinking money was the only thing that could save me. She looked around the room. I forgot people can help in other ways. David nodded. Businesses fail when every problem is treated as a cash problem. He smiled. Many are actually planning problems. Emily laughed through her tears. I suppose I've collected enough planners today. You certainly have. My mother had remained unusually quiet. Finally, she stood. I owe everyone here an apology. No one interrupted. She looked around the room one table at a time. I told each of you that Rose had already committed $25,000. Her voice trembled. She had not. I altered an ill because I convinced myself I already knew what she would eventually do. She swallowed. That was wrong. She turned toward me. I tried to use your reputation instead of asking for your permission. Then she looked at Emily. And I made you believe your sister had promised something she never did. Emily nodded silently. Linda faced the rest of the family again. If anyone wants their contribution returned immediately, she gestured toward the cashier's checks. I'll personally make sure that happens before I leave today. There was another long silence. Then my cousin Michael stood. I'm leaving my contribution. Others looked at him, but this time, he smiled at Emily. Because I'm choosing to. One by one, more relatives spoke. So are we. I'll keep mine there. We're still in, but only if Emily accepts it. Every eye turned toward my sister. Emily slowly stood. She looked at the checks, then at everyone around the room. Finally, she shook her head. I can't. Several people looked confused. I appreciate every single one of you. She smiled sadly. But if I accept this today, she looked toward me. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering whether I earned another chance. No one tried to persuade her. She continued. I want to rebuild my business. I just don't want it rebuilt on a misunderstanding. David looked genuinely impressed. I think that's the smartest business decision you've made all year. The room filled with quiet laughter. The tension that had dominated the afternoon finally began to disappear. A little later, while relatives gathered their coats, my mother approached me privately. I've been thinking. About what? The birthday speech. I smiled faintly. It didn't exactly go as planned. She managed a small laugh. No. Then she grew serious again. I keep replaying the moment when everyone was applauding. So do I. I thought you stayed quiet because you were trapped. I looked toward the nearly empty banquet room. I stayed quiet because I wanted everyone to hear the whole story. She frowned. I don't understand. If I'd interrupted immediately, I said, half the room would have believed we were arguing over money. She nodded slowly. But by waiting, I smiled. Everyone first believed the same version. And then everyone discovered the truth together. Understanding slowly crossed her face. Nobody had to choose which daughter to believe. They only had to compare the documents. She quietly wiped her eyes. I've underestimated you for a long time. I wasn't trying to defeat you. I know. You were trying to protect yourself. I nodded. And our family. She looked surprised. Our family? I couldn't stop people from believing a lie. But I could stop them from living with one. She hugged me carefully. This time she asked first. May I? I smiled. Yes. As we pulled apart, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Rebecca. Glad everything stayed civil. One last recommendation: put today's agreement in writing while everyone still remembers it the same way. I read the message twice. After everything that had happened, it was probably the best advice anyone could give. 6 months later, I drove to my parents' house for our annual summer barbecue. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder whether someone would ask me for money before dessert. That thought alone felt like progress. The backyard looked the same as it always had. My father stood beside the grill wearing the same faded baseball cap he insisted was lucky. Children ran through the sprinklers. Someone had music playing softly through an old speaker on the patio. It was familiar, comfortable, and surprisingly peaceful. Emily was the first person to greet me. She carried a laptop instead of a stack of unpaid invoices. I've got something to show you. We sat together on the back porch while everyone else finished setting the table. She opened the spreadsheet. I thought you'd appreciate actual numbers. I laughed. You know me well. She had closed her downtown office and moved into a shared creative workspace with 3 other small businesses. She had eliminated unnecessary subscriptions, negotiated lower vendor costs, and shifted her company away from expensive luxury weddings toward corporate events and community celebrations. "It isn't glamorous," she admitted, "but," she pointed to the bottom line, "I've been profitable for 3 straight months." I smiled wider than I expected. "You did this?" "I had help. You had advice." I tapped the spreadsheet. "You made the decisions." She closed the laptop. "I finally understand something." "What's that?" "When you kept refusing to write another check, I thought you didn't believe in me." She looked across the yard toward the guests. "But you believed I was capable of solving the problem myself." "I always did." She nodded slowly. "I just wasn't ready to believe it." A few minutes later, my father joined us with 3 glasses of iced tea. "I've started asking more questions," he said with an embarrassed smile. Emily laughed. "That's true." Dad shrugged. "Your mother says I'm becoming difficult." "I said you're becoming observant," my mother corrected as she walked onto the porch carrying a plate of fruit. We all laughed. It was a small moment, but it mattered. Months earlier, that conversation would have ended in tension. Now it ended in honesty. My mother sat beside me. "I want to show you something, too." She reached into a folder and handed me a single sheet of paper. At the top was a title. Family decisions below it were only 3 simple sentences. No one speaks on behalf of another adult without permission. Financial help is always discussed privately before being announced publicly. Generosity is a choice, never an expectation. I read it twice. "You wrote this?" She nodded. "I asked everyone if they wanted to add anything. They didn't. They said these 3 rules covered almost everything." I folded the paper carefully. "I'm keeping this." "I hoped you would." Later that afternoon, Uncle David raised a glass. "I promise this isn't another surprise announcement." Everyone laughed. He looked around the yard. "I've spent most of my career reviewing numbers." He glanced toward me. "But this family taught me something I never learned in accounting." "What was that?" someone asked. "Trust needs documentation just as much as money does." Several people nodded. "And boundaries don't weaken families." He smiled warmly. "They're what allow families to survive." The toast lasted less than a minute. It didn't need to be longer. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the plates. She handed me one quietly. "I still think about that birthday." "So do I." "I wish I had asked instead of assuming." I placed another plate in the dishwasher. "I know. I can't change what happened." "No." "But you've changed what happens now." She looked relieved. "I've tried. I've noticed." She smiled. "Thank you for noticing." As the sun began to set, I stood alone near the edge of the backyard for a moment. 6 months earlier, I had stood in another room while people applauded a promise I had never made. Back then, I thought the $25,000 was the center of the story. It wasn't. The real story was about consent, about the difference between generosity and obligation, about learning that love becomes fragile when it depends on access to someone's wallet instead of respect for their choices. Waiting until everyone finished clapping wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of patience. If I had argued before anyone saw the documents, the afternoon would have become a debate about personalities. Instead, it became a conversation about facts. The evidence didn't humiliate my family. It gave us a place to begin telling the truth. I still help my parents when I choose to. I still encourage Emily whenever she asks. But today, every request begins with a question instead of an expectation. And that single change has given us something far more valuable than $25,000. It gave us a family where yes actually means yes. because everyone finally learned to respect no. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.